The Hulu original series, Furious, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
There are 3 victims we know of.
The suspect is female, white, late 20s.
Female serial killers
kill for power, control.
I believe there's a deeper motivation here.
You have no idea who you're dealing with, and you are gonna end up dead.
I've been waiting for you.
Watch the Hulu original series, Furious, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+. For bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Let's start with some exciting news. We're just a few days away from August, which to me is the unofficial start of Halloween season. And I can't think of a better way to start celebrating than by telling you a handful of the scariest true horror stories straight from Reddit. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, I'm going to tell you 5 true Reddit horror stories. Is it possible that the thing you saw out of the corner of your eye, or the strange feeling you had of being watched, or that piece of furniture that looks like it was moved, wasn't just a figment of your imagination, but something paranormal or supernatural? I'll share the stories. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Story 1. So one of my closest friends growing up lived in a house that was, beyond a reasonable doubt, haunted as fuck. The house was definitely somewhere around a century old, or at least now it is, and our town was situated in a very woodsy suburb. He and every member of his family had experiences there. Several of our friends had their own experiences there, and I had my own too. Honestly, it would be impossible to try and condense it down into one experience, and I believe it's worth sharing the accounts I can remember. I'll start with the least scary one, which was thankfully my own, and then move to the ones worth telling. During high school, my parents went on a vacation, and for a few days I stayed at this particular house of my friend. Let's call him Paul. I stayed in Paul's room in a sleeping bag on the floor, while he slept in his bed. One morning, I woke up to someone whispering in my ear, like directly into my ear. My name. You need to leave. Now. It did not say this super maliciously, almost like more of a warning. It definitely woke me up though, and immediately I was thinking Paul was fucking with me, as he frequently did. But I turned around to my right, where he was sleeping, and realized he was completely out. I said, "What?" to him, thinking he was joking around, and he didn't wake up. He was definitely asleep. It was quiet and still too early for even Paul's parents to be up. Then it hit me, as it still hits me today. I heard the whisper in my left ear, and Paul was on my right side. Paul had other experiences in that same room I can remember off the top of my head. For a time, he told me he suffered from sleep paralysis on a consistent basis. He would see demons in his room and would be unable to move. He told me that, very frequently in his sleep, the standing fan by his bed would become a demon girl, and he would wake up with a jolt of adrenaline, having punched or thrown the fan down to the ground. He told me he would sometimes see someone standing in the closet his bed faced, both asleep and awake. Oddly enough, his sleep paralysis significantly decreased as soon as he moved out of that place. That floor, The second floor where Paul, his parents, and 2 of his 4 sisters slept was spooky. I remember getting weird feelings up there. One of his sisters claimed to see the ghost of a little boy in their bathroom. His mom once opened the closet in her bedroom to find the same little boy standing in there, looking up at her and asking for his mom. I heard about that one when I was in middle school, and it always creeped me out. It's always scarier when the adults see them too. Before my own experience, I generally thought Paul was just trying to fuck with me when he would tell me about these other experiences. Most of our other friends were the same way, thinking Paul was full of shit. Even after my own experience, at times I thought I just as easily could have dreamt it up. But then a few of those same friends, some of them complete non-believers beforehand, had their own experiences, and that changed my whole idea of the house. Once a year, Paul and his family would take a trip and have someone take care of their 2 dogs. One of our mutual friends came over to do just that one day. When she got there that evening to feed the dogs, the house was dark and empty. For some context, the dogs were being fed near the kitchen, and adjacent to the kitchen was the dining room, which led further away into the entryway, and after that, a small living room. Well, not long after feeding the dogs, she heard a blood-curdling scream, a goddamn shriek, coming from that living room, like someone was inside with her. She booked it outside with the dogs, checked for intruders, and saw no one was there. I'm pretty sure after that she called Paul, told him what happened, and he laughed and said, "Yeah, shit like that happens sometimes." A couple years later, one of the bigger doubters in our group, who thought all of us were full of shit, had his own experience. Paul hosted a fair amount of parties back then, and usually we would use his basement to avoid any sort of noise complaints. So all of us are in the basement having a good time, and this particular friend of ours decides to run up and grab another drink from upstairs. Mind you, this friend is not the kind of guy to get completely fucked up, like he'll only ever have a beer or 2 at most. So for all intents and purposes, he's sober. He goes up, and the ground floor was completely empty, as everyone was in the basement. There was a porch directly outside the dining room / entryway / living room, and it extended long ways across the back of the house. As our friend was walking into the dining room to grab a beer off the table, he sees a tall, grim-looking woman standing on the porch outside, looking through the window directly at him. He knows something is wrong because she's sort of featureless and also standing outside, by herself, looking inside. He takes his eyes off of her for one moment, looks back, and she's gone. A few days later, he tells Paul what happened, and Paul tells him how he and his siblings have seen that same woman before. Our friend becomes a believer. Paul's basement was creepy as hell, but I can only think of one thing that ever happened down there. It was more of a storage cellar than anything else, but we still used it for parties and just to generally hang out. But it was so cluttered with random shit that whole areas of the room were completely cut off. At some point in college, one summer when I was back home, Paul and his family were doing the annual Throw Old Shit Away Fest, and he openly invited some friends to come and help. I came one day, and when I got there, Paul's dad nonchalantly told me, "You get to see the secret room." Turns out that in the far corner of the basement, behind a bunch of clutter, was a little storage closet nobody, besides maybe Paul's parents, knew anything about. We investigated it that day, and in it we found a bunch of random old shit. I can't remember everything exactly, and I don't even know if Paul's family knew what this stuff was, but amongst all of it, I specifically remember finding this very old-fashioned, vintage music box. You know, like the one in The Conjuring with the dancing ballerina. That kind of thing. We decided it was creepy and didn't want anything to do with it, and left it in that closet. Well, on a different day, when I thankfully was not there, Paul and another friend were cleaning out the basement, when suddenly, that same music box started playing by itself from behind the door of the closet. They were alone and had not been in that closet all day. They immediately bolted up the stairs. At the top of the house, there were 2 small bedrooms, both belonging to Paul's older sisters. This is the last story I will share, as it's the one that stuck with me the longest. The second oldest sister once had a vivid and intense dream in which she herself was being exorcised. A demon was being forced out of her as a group of priests were standing over her convulsing body, shouting verses at her, and she remembered it being just crazy intense. After enduring this for some time, she suddenly jolted herself awake and yelled, and at that precise moment, a rosary she kept hanging on her wall flew from its place, crashed to the floor, and shattered into a bunch of pieces, completely on its own. She was covered in sweat and completely terrified. There was no one else in the room. Yeah, that place was fucking haunted. Story 2. Not an exorcism, but I was involved in using a Ouija board once. I have never done it again because of the shit that board said. Those who believe without a doubt that demons do not exist can cite every and all possible studies. But when you have a board predicting events with eerie accuracy and exposing secrets amongst friends in the group, you know there are things in this world which we currently don't understand as humans. Twice, the 2 cats in the house would stare at the board and howl at it, hiss, and freak everyone out. The board said it hated cats and to remove them, so we did. When we switched rooms later, the cats got in and did the same exact thing. The things that were said scared me so bad that I slept with a light on for 2 years afterwards. I promise you I'm not exaggerating. I could fill a book with all the things that happened that night and the month following. Minor things happened over the course of the year, but that first month really threw me for a loop. I'll touch on some of the things that happened that night, but know that I'm leaving a lot out and only touching on major points. First, a little background. Me and my 2 buds. We were slightly buzzed, bored with video games, and the friend that owns the house says he has a board. My other friend is Catholic and says absolutely do not use it. So of course, that makes me want to do it even more, and we somehow convince him to come along. Being buzzed in the basement in complete darkness, things are a little spooky, but none of us believe in Ouija boards. We poke fun for a little bit. I fake the piece moving, and then we get serious and decide to get quiet and really try it before giving up and returning to video games. That last chance ended up working. The planchette moved very slightly and was very weak, but it did move. This is when the cats seemed to immediately be aware of what was happening, and they came down into the basement and started howling. It was frightening, honestly, just to hear the howl. The board said it hated cats, although it wouldn't explain why. It just ignored the question and said to remove them immediately. We did. So to make sure we weren't being played by each other, we all took turns moving the piece without help. We could still communicate. Okay, so we asked it to predict something. It says 16 people are in the house. We still had people over, so we went upstairs really quick and counted. We had counted 15, but then remembered one of my bud's roommates had his kid over. 16. The entity, which I won't name, I'll admit still out of fear, then predicted my friend's next drug test. He was on probation for smoking pot. He can call in to see when it is after a certain time, midnight, I believe. And once the time came, we called in, and it was correct. So we ended up spending 5 hours asking questions. The planchette began to move faster and grew stronger. The entity even made jokes at some points, which really threw us for a loop. We moved to the attic since sunrise was coming, and the board for some reason said it couldn't work in the light that was seeping through the basement windows. When we set up in the attic, the entity said it isn't the name we were looking for. We ask it to get the right entity, and it says no. We were about to call it quits anyway, when the piece moves to H and then A. We're all thinking, what the fuck does that mean? And then realize it spells ha, which of course is laughter. It was the entity the whole time. We forgot about keeping the cats out. The path upstairs isn't blocked, so they come up and do the hissing, howling fits again. And once again, the board says to remove them, and we do. Throughout the entire process, our Catholic friend is freaking out, and the entity is constantly freaking him out by moving the piece off the board and onto his lap. At one point, it calls him his pet. Shit gets really weird, and we decide to stop. We read that you have to ask the entity to go to the goodbye text to clear the board, but the entity continually says it won't do that, and that it will follow us for the rest of our lives. It starts predicting other things, and saying fucked up shit that I don't want to get into. So we finally convince it to say goodbye. Books fall off a very stable bookshelf when this happens. I leave a little bit after. A month later, I'm back playing video games, and I'd completely forgotten about this incident despite having insane nightmares almost every night of the week, and weird things happening to me. Same house, same 2 friends. We were playing Halo and expecting another friend when I hear a door slam. I look at my friend that owned the house and say, "About fucking time," and then look at the clock. It's 2 a.m., and it turns out that friend couldn't make it. That was a door in the attic slamming, and we all looked at each other warily. My bud's girlfriend and roommate start talking about voices, door slams, etc., and how they won't stay in the house by themselves anymore. This is just a very broad summary. A lot of crazy shit has happened since that board was used. Secrets in a group were given out. Predictions came true that I didn't touch on. We all had crazy nightmares. And at one point, a dream my girlfriend had of the demon floating above me while I was up late at night with her in bed, a real/surreal dream where she was in the perspective of the corner of the room in real time, actually happened. She drew the demon, and I can verify it's fucked up. I was awake at the time and saw my window blinds move back and forth in an S pattern, which isn't natural, and there was no reason for them to do that. She saw this in the dream, and the demon was laughing while he was moving the blinds on the window. Things like this, which I don't care to remember, happened frequently for a while there. Anyway, I tell all my friends not to mess with the Ouija boards. I'll tell my kids not to. There are things we don't understand, and I'll never use one again in my lifetime. I recommend no one else does either, because you just never know who or what is gonna reach back. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. Story 3. I spent my childhood, until I was 9, in the suburbs outside of Washington, D.C. I lived there with my parents and 3 siblings who were much older, 14, 16, and 17, until they had all moved out by the time I was around 6. The house was a single level with a large finished basement. I had various paranormal experiences as a child. The most common was a woman's voice randomly saying my name, even when my parents were out in the yard and I was alone in the house. It was never threatening, just a woman with a normal voice calmly saying my name. Though of course, it scared the hell out of me. The other experience I had was really creepy. Sometimes, if I woke up in the middle of the night, a scene would be playing on my bedroom wall. Always the same scene. An old-fashioned horse and buggy pulling up, and a woman getting out. It was faded and jittery like it was being played on an old projector, and it had a sort of strobe effect. It was always the same scene. And then it would just stop, and the room would go dark again. The last experience I had was the scariest, and thankfully it was the last. It was the week my family was getting ready to move. My aunt and uncle had come down to help, and I was playing hide and seek with my cousins. I hid in a downstairs closet. The last thing I remember is a sensation of hands around my neck, strangling me. And the next thing I remember is my cousin standing over me, screaming for help. My parents rushed me to the emergency room, where they checked me over, and could find nothing wrong. The doctor concluded I had suffered an asthma attack, though I had no history of asthma before, or after that one event. So we moved into a newly built house, and it was absolutely the most unhaunted house in existence. And over the years, I just chalked up my experiences to an overactive childhood imagination. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm now a freshman in college, and my siblings are all in for Thanksgiving. Conversation turns to the old house in the DC suburbs, and my sister says, "I never was so happy as the day I got married and moved out of that haunted hellhole." This is the first I had ever heard any of my family say they had similar experiences. So for the first time ever, we began comparing notes. My sister told us about seeing a woman in a white dress on several occasions. In one instance, she was laying in bed on the phone when she saw a woman walk into her bedroom, stand by the mirror, and fidget like she was putting on an earring. And then she just turned and walked out. My sister said she assumed it was our mom, though mom was always the blue jeans type, so my sister was curious as to why she was dressing up. So my sister hangs up the phone and walks into the kitchen and saw my mom, who was just standing at the sink in her blue jeans doing dishes. She asked her if she was just in her room, and mom said, "No, I've been doing dishes for the last half hour." My brother seemed embarrassed and wouldn't go into detail about what they saw. They just kind of blew it off by saying, "We saw some strange things, but we were smoking a lot of dope at the time, so who knows what was real and what wasn't." Likewise, my mom said we were pretty much all crazy, as she had spent more time in the house than anyone and never saw anything whatsoever. Though my sister later told me that wasn't entirely true, as mom had told her once when she was much younger about seeing the woman in white. She just said that mom was just so determined that none of them talk about it around me when I was young, and the subject was so off limits that mom had actually convinced herself it never happened. My dad had perhaps the most bizarre story. He was an electrician and had a workshop in the basement. One day, he was working with his soldering iron, sat it down on the workbench, turned around to pick up a tool, and when he turned back around, it was simply gone. Needless to say, he was a bit worried that a hot soldering iron had fallen somewhere it might start a fire, so he searched all over for it, but it was simply nowhere to be found. At first, he thought one of my brothers was playing a prank, but he realized they couldn't have gotten into the workshop and grabbed it without him seeing. And when he went to check, neither of them were even home. Eventually, he just threw his hands up in the air in disbelief and went out and bought another one. Fast forward several months to Christmas time. The Christmas tree and all the decorations were kept in a closet next to the workshop. During the year, there were boxes piled around the door, so it wasn't even accessible. Dad opens the door and turns on the light, and there lays his soldering iron, right on top of the very first box, the cord tightly wound around it and looking like it had been gently sat there where it would be seen. Curiously, this was the exact same closet I had the strangling incident in. Then my dad tells us a really scary story. He said that after he and my mom got married and bought the house, and before any of us kids came along, his niece was trying to get a job in DC, so she asked if she could move in until she found a job. He told her sure, and fixed up a bedroom in the basement so she could have some privacy. The first night, he and my mom were awakened to a loud scream. Dad grabbed his gun from the nightstand and rushed downstairs, thinking it had to be an intruder. His niece was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale white, a look of terror on her face. He tried to get her to say what happened, but she would just shake her head and refuse to talk about it. She absolutely would not go back in the basement and wouldn't even get near the basement door when it was open. She slept on the couch for 2 days until she could make arrangements to go back home. She wouldn't even go back in the basement to get her belongings, and Dad had to pack them up for her. He never really had much contact with her after that, but eventually asked her mother if she ever said what she saw. Her mother claimed that she had seen someone come into the room. She thought it was just my dad coming back after having forgotten to tell her something. But when she sat up to talk, the figure of a man was grinning at her with a swollen face, eyes swollen shut, covered in blood, and grinning teeth protruding from shriveled purple lips. After hearing all of this, my sister got curious and did some research. The house was part of a group of houses built by a housing developer in the mid-1920s. At that time, most people lived near where they worked, but he got the idea he could build a housing development for upper-income federal workers who would like to live in a more rural setting and commute to their job. This idea was actually about 25 years ahead of its time, as suburbs really didn't exist in the 1920s. He worked out a deal with a contractor. If he built the houses, he could have one of his choice as payment. Unfortunately, when the stock market collapsed, the country went into a depression, and both the developer and the contractor lost everything. The contractor ended up hanging himself in the house he had picked for his own, which, you guessed it, was ours. The house sat empty for several years, and then was bought by a couple with no children. The husband died shortly thereafter, but the wife lived there for the rest of her life until she passed away and my parents purchased it. Reading between the lines, I think the bad spirit in the basement that my dad's niece saw and that tried to choke me was the ghost of the contractor that had killed himself in the house. I think the lady in white was harmless, maybe even protective, and maybe probably the old lady that had lived there prior to my parents. I also think she was the one that whispered my name. As for the house and buggy, I don't think that was even really related to the house, just some scene from long before the house was built that replayed over and over. On a side note, the house was torn down in 2009, and now a swanky-looking $1 million home sits in its place. Not sure if the spirits have now found rest, but I have noticed the house has already been resold 3 times since 2012, when it was built, so people don't seem to be staying long. Story 4. For the sake of context, I'll start by saying that when I was in my late teens, I used to live in a small town just outside from where my girlfriend was at the time. We used to spend a lot of time together and go out for lots of walks, as neither of us could drive at the time. Every few days I would walk her to her driving school, just up the road. Her classes always started pretty late into the evening, and it was winter in Germany, so the days were very short and it got dark very early. I used to hate when she would walk there alone. Furthermore, after dropping her off at her classes, I always tried to be there, to walk her home also. I would simply depart after dropping her off and return after the duration of her class. This is where shit gets weird. One particular evening, I dropped her off as normal, only about a 20-minute walk, traversing a quiet wooded park and a few short side streets to get there. I left to go back home for about an hour or so, then departed early so that I could catch her before she left. For some reason, I arrived especially early this time, and I had to wait outside for about 20 minutes. It was very dark, and I was simply sitting at the bus stop across the street from the school. I waited and waited and waited, and she just wasn't exiting the doors to the school. I sat outside for probably 35 minutes just waiting there. It should also be noted that I didn't have my phone on me at the time. I had thought it would be a quick and easy excursion, so I didn't bring it. That was clearly a mistake. At this point, I of course started to wonder, has she left already? I must have missed her. She should be finished by now, etc. After about 40 minutes went by, I started contemplating heading back the way I came to see if she was walking alone. But I didn't want to risk it just in case she hadn't actually left. So I stood there, waiting nervously. This is the really weird part. So I'm sitting there, tapping my foot, and I see two people with flashlights walking up the street from the opposite direction, apparently looking for someone. I thought to myself, what the fuck? And I got up and approached to see what was going on. The two people searching were my girlfriend, who I was waiting for, and her mother. As soon as they saw me approaching, they said, "There you are. We've been looking all over for you. Where the hell have you been and what the hell were you doing back there?" I said, "What do you mean? I've been waiting here for 40 minutes waiting for you to leave school. Where did you two just come from? What's going on?" I finished early today and started walking back alone. I wasn't able to contact you. Remember, I didn't have my phone. But I saw you following me. Why are you back here now? This isn't funny. I was dumbfounded. What are you talking about? I've been right here for 45 minutes straight. Now, this is what my girlfriend saw from her perspective. After leaving slightly early from her class that day, she began walking back home after noticing I hadn't arrived to pick her up yet. Assuming she would bump into me on the way, she wasn't worried about walking alone, and she confidently began heading home. She spotted me from about 500 meters away and witnessed me crossing the street, which I had actually done while walking towards the school. She expected me to approach her and greet her, but it seems I didn't notice her across the street, and we walked right by one another. This was the last time she actually saw me before meeting me again at the bus stop. Regrettably, I used to be quite the prankster. I was always teasing and messing with her, so she assumed that's what I was doing then. She thought I was intentionally ignoring her so that I would sneak around and scare her or something. I don't know. Either way, she didn't call my name because she thought I was being a dick. Now the creepy part. So after that initial interaction, I shortly thereafter arrived at the bus stop and proceeded to wait. She, on the other hand, had a very eventful walk. After she saw me initially, she kept walking towards home, expecting me to jump scare her or whatever, and her expectations, to her, seemed to be fulfilled. She began hearing footsteps behind her about 10 meters away. She knew it was me just fucking with her. She then looked back, and what she saw was me following her in my exact outfit, walking exactly how I walk, just following her and staring at the ground. According to her, it was my exact face, hair color, and even physical demeanor. To her, it was beyond the shadow of a doubt that it was me following her. So damn strange. The doppelganger said nothing, never looked up, and kept a consistent 10 meters behind her. He followed her for a few minutes down the road, just being creepy as fuck. She, of course, turned forward again and laughed at my supposed pathetic attempt to scare her. But after an amount of time, she started getting weirded out and wondering what the fuck I was doing. Shortly thereafter, the footsteps stopped and she lost me around a bend in the road. She looked back confused and even called my name to no avail. She shrugged and continued forward through the wooded park near her home. It was a very quiet, dark, and creepy park, but she powered through it. A quick reminder that this entire time I was actually sitting at the bus stop. About halfway through the small park, she heard the footsteps once again. This time, they were much faster and heavier. She turned around to once again see me sprinting towards her full tilt. Baggy jeans, heavy sweater, just sprinting as fast as I could. She saw my eyes glaring into hers and staring into her soul. At this point, she was startled. She didn't know what the fuck was happening, and I was apparently booking it straight towards her. As the doppelganger got to about 10 meters away, he turned and ran down another pathway in the park, running towards a non-lit, pitch-black section of the park, sprinting as fast as he could. What the fuck? She watched as I sprinted into the darkness and faded from view. The intense confusion sparked some worry in her. She was almost home and thought maybe I was running around to meet her on the other side of the park or something. Also, she just wanted to get the hell out of that creepy-ass park. She really gave the doppelganger the benefit of the doubt that night. So she arrived at home, asked her mother if I'd arrived, and sure enough, I never showed up. She tells her mom the whole story, and they begin to worry that something was wrong. They waited a few minutes to see if I would show, then decided to look around for me. When their attempts failed, they thought to look around near the driving school again, and that's where they found me, the real me, at the bus stop. That's basically the whole story. It was extremely weird and scary, and since that day, about 6 years ago, I've been wondering what the hell it could mean. I've heard that doppelgangers are omens of death, but lately, I've been thinking maybe it was some elaborate glitch in the Matrix, or some kind of intersection of universes. Story 5. When I was a kid, my little brother and I visited my grandparents in Tahlequah, Oklahoma every summer. It was a pretty boring town. As the capital of the Cherokee Nation, most recreational activities were related to the culture and history of the Cherokees. The last summer we spent there, I was 11, that age between wanting so badly to be seen as a teenager, but still finding enjoyment in Bratz dolls. My little brother was 8 and wouldn't settle down unless he had his Nintendo DS. I didn't dread visiting my grandparents, like many children do. Other than the culture shock that came from leaving our home in LA to the relatively small Oklahoma town, I loved spending time with my grandparents, and so did my brother. They spoiled us with toys and ice cream. On a Thursday afternoon, my little brother and I were playing at the elementary school across the street from my grandparents' house. If you've ever been to Oklahoma, you probably know how quickly the weather can change. It's not uncommon for it to snow one day and be in the 70s the next day. This day went from sunny to cloudy extremely quick. It didn't begin raining or lightning, so my brother and I continued to play. But these weren't normal clouds. They looked heavier and thicker. They were almost black. I'm still not sure if the clouds were some sort of warning for what was about to happen, or if I'm just trying to connect things. A girl who was probably 9 or 10 showed up at some point. She didn't have her parents with her, but it was a fairly safe town and not uncommon for kids to walk around. She introduced herself as Allie. She was blonde and blue-eyed, but began enlightening us with old Cherokee ghost tales. With Tahlequah being the capital of the Cherokee Nation, many urban legends in other towns are actually true in Tahlequah. Most people's great-great-grandmas really were Cherokee, and the school playground we were currently playing on really had once been an Indian burial ground. She told us one particularly grotesque story about the Deer Lady, who was a heartbroken woman that went insane and cut her legs off and stitched a deer's legs on her torso in place. Her final story inspired what we thought would be a fun adventure. She told us about a woman's daughter who had been brutally murdered by her husband on their anniversary for allegedly flirting with another man. They buried her, and out of respect, never removed her gravestone from when the school was built. Allie told us it would take a bit of maneuvering, but there was a panel that could be removed, and we could crawl underneath the school and see the gravestone. We were all in shape, so we began our adventure. To our disappointment, the panel had been screwed shut and it began to rain. My brother and I decided to go home, but Allie, however, insisted that there had to be another way in. I tried to tell her that her parents would probably be worried and that it would be best for her to go home too, but she was determined to get underneath the school. My brother and I went into my grandparents' house and changed into some dry clothes, drank Kool-Aid, and watched TV. While my brother and grandparents were watching The Fairly Odd Parents, I noticed I could still see Allie, drenched in rain, trying to find a way underneath the school from the living room window. Eventually, she did. I watched her crawl in, but I never saw her crawl out. We sat through an entire episode of The Fairly Odd Parents and half an episode of Drake and Josh, so it had to have been at least 45 minutes. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I told myself she had to have come out a different way, or maybe she came out when I wasn't looking and finally drifted off. The next morning, I woke up refreshed. I was certain Allie had gotten out. My grandparents took us to the carnival and to Brahms, the local ice cream shop. It was 6 o'clock in the evening when we got home, and my grandma began cooking supper while my grandpa took a nap. My brother and I were kids though, and still had lots of energy left, so we went across the street to play some more, and our grandma told us she would call us when supper was ready. I told my little brother that I had seen Allie go underneath the school and asked him if he was up for an adventure. He agreed, and I went to the panel that I saw Allie loosen. I removed it and crawled underneath the school, and my brother followed. The remaining daylight flooded into the basement along with us, providing us with just enough light to see things directly in front of us. The ground was cold, wet dirt, and there were many pipes and old basketballs to crawl around. I immediately spotted 8 to 10 headstones though. The first one was directly to the right of my brother and I, but the name was too faded to read. I was feeling kind of creeped out that Allie had been right, and we were crawling over a bunch of dead bodies. I probably would have left, but my brother didn't seem afraid at all, and I wanted to seem braver than him. So I crawled to the next stone. This one read Andrew Cummings, and had a birth date of 1890 and a death date of 1902. There was one to the left of it that read Allison Cummings, and had a birth date of 1893 and a death date of 1902. This freaked me out even more, and made me think of Allie, who had the same name and looked about the same age as the dead girl several feet below me. My brother suddenly shouted, "Look! Something in the corner just moved." Before I could tell him that we should leave immediately, he shoved me out of the way and began crawling incredibly fast to the corner furthest from us. I could clearly see a couple of large figures moving, but couldn't make out much else. "They're probably just dogs. Let's go," I told him. But as he crawled, I crawled right behind him, getting closer and closer to the larger figures. that began to look more and more like silhouettes of 3 people sitting against a wall, all with their knees to their chest. When they came into clear view, my brother turned around and crawled underneath me. I held him close to my chest. We were both terrified. The first girl was clearly Allie, except she didn't look as lively as she had looked yesterday. She wasn't smiling, and her hair was stringy. Next to her was a boy, who looked close in age to me, and had no hair at all. He wasn't smiling either. Then there was a girl who looked more normal than Allie or the boy. Her skin was dark, and her hair was so long it bunched up at the ground. She looked like she was about 16, but her facial expression was the scariest. It was one of absolute despair. The scariest part about all of them was their eyes. I could see my brother's eyes glowing, but none of their eyes glowed. It didn't even really look like they had eyes, just pits of darkness. Allie smiled and said, "Thank God, you guys came." The other 2 laughed. "Yeah, well, we're going to be leaving now," I said, trying my hardest to sound casual and not scared. All 3 laughed, and the other girl spoke up. "No, you're not." Her voice had a confidence that mine didn't. I pushed my brother in the direction we came in, and he quickly began crawling away. I heard my grandmother calling out to us, and called out to her to help us. All 3 of them suddenly stopped laughing, and Allie suddenly looked scared. She said to us, "Leave right now, and never tell a soul you saw us. You got lucky." We didn't have to be told twice and quickly crawled out. At dinner that night, my brother and I chalked up our silence to it having been a long day and us being tired. We never played at the playground across the street again, and rarely talked about the incident. Now here's where the story gets wild. 5 months after we left, my grandparents were murdered in their own home. A neighbor claimed she had seen my grandma let 3 children into their home the day of the murder. A bald boy, a blonde girl, and a dark-haired girl. The police were never able to find any leads, and the case was eventually closed. Neither my brother nor I plan to visit Tahlequah or even Oklahoma ever again. But I know that it doesn't matter. I'm certain that one day they'll show up on my doorstep too. I know I'll tell them to go away, and I can only hope that will be enough. What did you think of these scary Reddit experiences? Comment on Spotify and let me know. And if you have a scary experience of your own, email me at redtreehousepod@gmail.com and I'll feature your story on an upcoming episode. Did you know the Red Treehouse is on Patreon? Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse and join the Patreon community. A special shout out to This Sick Beats 89, Tamika Watts, Tony Edmiston, Heather Arano, Tramika Montgomery, Jennifer Tweedo, and Ken Armstead for joining the Patreon family. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, make plans to join me next time. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.